Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Champions of Self podcast. Today's special guest is Samantha Tirone. I met her just recently. We had a great conversation, and she has been kind enough to join me on the podcast today. Hello, Samantha. How are you?
Hello, I am very good, Ben. How are you?
Great. Samantha, why don't you tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. First off, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be networking and just meeting new people like yourself. Again, my name is Samantha. I live in Warren, New Jersey. I am 29. I left education to go into business for myself. So I guess you could say I am an entrepreneur and I'm a business owner as well.
Very good. And what is the business that you own?
I run a home-based business as well as a dance competition, and I'm in the process of starting up a podcast as well and
Ooh,
building an event for women in business.
awesome. What is the general age range that you have in your dance studio?
Well, the event holds competitions for anyone from the age of 3 or 4 all the way up to seniors in high school and freshmen in college.
Very cool. So, Samantha, we're going to talk about today self-advocacy and healthy outlets in the midst of addiction, right? So
Absolutely.
we were talking the other day about somebody you were close to, as well as your own life, and how addiction played a role and some outlets that you turned to. Go ahead and tell us part of your story there.
Absolutely. Well, my late fiance was in active recovery and unfortunately fell back into active addiction. For him, his outlet was the gym. And after an injury, he no longer had the outlet of the gym. And for me, I had struggled a long time with food addiction. And then that kind of shifted after a weight loss surgery that I had, and I had thrown myself into taking care of him and just staying on track with him and, keeping things on track so that, there were no relapses or steps backwards. And then after he had passed away, I couldn't turn to food really because of the weight loss surgery that I had had. So I had turned to spending money, um, and that was very unhealthy. And then after COVID kind of hit, I, prior to COVID, I had turned everything into the gym and working out, and you know, I thought, well, it helped him, it could help me. And what I found after COVID happened was that, you're just replacing one coping mechanism with another. And until you really start working from the inside out, you're not going to ever really deal with anything. And yes, outlets are so important, but really just dealing with those things that are causing you to need an outlet is the most important thing.
That is so true. We'll talk a bit more about that. So give us some details about your process of working from the inside out. What did you discover about yourself that these outlets were trying to resolve?
It spans over so many things. I think I just as a female, I'm very nurturing and I'm a fixer by nature. I think I had mentioned that in our last conversation. So I throw myself wholeheartedly into things, when I see what they could be. So with my late fiance, I saw what the future could hold for us, and I got so wrapped up in just fighting for that I kind of lost myself. And then upon losing myself, after losing him, it was this battle to figure out what I wanted. In the midst of his addiction, I lost so much of what I wanted. I lost sight of that. And, it took, we're almost 2 years after his death. And it was a matter of personal development. It was a matter of education and research and just really honing in on what was really important to me. And it was when I figured out that I really enjoyed helping people, I really enjoyed making a difference, and I wanted to continue making a difference in the world of, addiction and recovery, even though I had never been, an active addict in that sense. But really just once I started honing in on what I really wanted, it was a lot easier for me to start dealing with things. And it was instances that I never thought of that happened as a child, and then instances that happened within my relationship, that happened within friendships, with my relationships with my parents. You know, I did a brief stint in therapy, and I walked in on the first day and I was like, look, I have no intention of being a lifer. So you need to just like help me get to the root of things and then I'll be out. And she just kind of looked at me and she was like, a lifer. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be like once a week, every week till I die. Like, I'm not here for that. I have some stuff going on. I got to get through it. And then we're going to move forward and, you know, we're going to be done here.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not get through the whole process. I lasted probably, when all was said and done, about 3.5, 4 months. And then I was like, nope, this isn't working for me anymore. One of my flaws that I have admitted to in the last 1.5 years is my lack of patience. And it is for no other reason than I know what I want, or I think I know what I want. And when it doesn't happen in the timeline that I have set in my head, I'm like, nope, new plan, same outcome as possible, but we're gonna reroute it, and we're gonna think of another way to come up with it that's gonna roll this along a little bit faster. So you know, and I mean, I don't know what your experience in any kind of addiction is, but in any addiction, the recovery is a time consuming thing, you know, and since I lost Ryan, and even being with Ryan, you know, it was patience was getting me through every scenario. You know, you had to think fast and act fast, but also have patience. It's like, hurry up and wait, and then be patient. And then it's like, okay, well, I was patient for this. Now I'm going to be, what do you mean I have to be patient again?
Yeah.
You know, so it's just this cyclical thing of patience. And I feel like God, the universe, whatever you believe in, consistently, whatever you're struggling with is going to put you in those situations to either fall back into it or overcome it. And I think now that I've experienced all that I have, my level of patience is definitely not where it could be, but it's growing, it's better. You know, my addictive habits are definitely, they you know, dabble here and there, and you know, they fluctuate just like anything, but you know, patience in overcoming those has also been, you know, a struggle. So it's definitely all forward movement. And you know, when you're in business for yourself, you really have to learn a whole different realm of patience, which I am learning now with our friend COVID. So just
Right.
you know, patience and just working, you know, like I said, from the inside out. What's the root of the issue, and what are you trying to replace, or what are you trying to cover up that you just don't want to deal with? And that was so raw for me, because a week after my fiance passed away, I was back at work, back at my day job. And I was like, well, none of these people know me, so it's fine. They don't need to know what's going on, and I can just kind of escape it. Which was definitely probably not healthy. You know, it pushed the grieving process back probably about 6 months. You know, and then I kind of started all over from square one. So that was definitely not good. But you know, like I said, I'm a fixer, and I pushed through things, and I just kept going and thought that I would be fine doing that, and that was not the case.
Right. You shared a lot of important things, so I'm going to unpackage a few of them.
Absolutely.
This idea of being a fixer and pushing through things, that happens to a lot of people. I can relate. The principle of, well, I don't understand the emotions. Yes, it was a big deal, but I just don't want to deal with it right now. I know what I can do, or I'm going to focus on what I can do and just ignore everything else. And like you said, that just pushes the grieving process back 6 months. My goodness, it's still going to be there, isn't it?
It sure is.
And that's huge for people to realize. I mean, I know a lot of people who get busy with work or get busy with school, and they just say, look, I'm going to focus on what I'm good at, or I'm going to dive so deep into what's keeping me busy that I have no room for the emotions. And that is another thing. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we all call it something different, but she was calling it the addiction of choice. If you want to be addicted to being busy, to school, to work, to drugs, to reading, to whatever it is, right? If it's used to avoid the emotions, then that behavior isn't being most productive for us. Then one more thing that I wanted to unpack. You had said that you had dealt with eating, right? That's what you turned to, is that right?
Yes.
And that your late fiance, he turned to the gym.
Yes.
And then you lost your fiance. That was roughly 2 years ago. And when was it that you saw your therapist?
Mm-hmm. I started seeing her briefly, shortly after he passed away. So he passed away in November, and I think like December, end of December, beginning of January, I was like, I gotta do something. You know, you get into a really dark place at different times. You know, some people go right to the dark place. Some people, it takes a while to kind of process what's going on in your life. So it's like one day it just kind of hits you. And that's kind of what happened to me. I was kind of just going along, doing my thing, not really, you know, looking to move, started my new job. But then just one day I was in the car and I broke down into hysterics and reality hit. And I had kind of hit this point of, what am I doing? You know, so it got me through a really hard point. You know, the scheduled wedding was a time that I needed to be in therapy, and I did go through a period of time on antidepressants. And you know, it was one of those things where I was like, I'm so anti taking pills when it comes to dealing with things, you know, especially because of my experience with, you know, Brian. So I said, you know what, I don't want to take these anymore. And probably not the best medical advice. So I do not advocate, I'm not advocating that you just stop taking things for your health. Cold turkey like I did, it kind of messed with me, but I was in a space where I was like, I don't want these and I'm not doing it. And patience played into that scenario as well. And, you know, I just said, I have to start dealing with things. I don't know kind of what exactly it was that was the pivotal moment. But I woke up one day and I was like, I have to deal with this and I have to find something to distract me and also pour my energy into, which was, you know, starting a business. But I think it was a lot healthier for me than anything else. And I didn't necessarily consider it turning to work. I turned it into, you know, how can I help other people? How can I work through this while helping other people? You know, I started sharing my story. I started doing podcast interviews just like this one. I started, you know, speaking out a little bit more on social media. People were reaching out to me. So I was building a lot of these really, really solid connections, and I was helping people, you know, and that's where the advocacy came in. You know, we cannot help or serve others if we're not first serving ourselves. And that was something that I definitely learned the hard way. And, you know, I feel like if Ryan had a better sense of self-advocacy and he wasn't feeling so much like he was pushed back into a corner, he would have had a much more successful outcome with his recovery. And I think that rings true for all of us. If we kind of put down our foot and say, this is what I'm not going to tolerate, and this is where I want to be, and this is what I want out of life, and you just keep that goal in mind and you just keep pushing forward towards that goal, naturally you're going to be working on yourself.
This is a lot of good stuff. That's very similar to what I do as a coach, where we focus on a goal, and by pursuing something that you want rather than focusing on what you don't want, not only do you feel progress, but you're working on yourself. We do deal with the emotional pain. We don't hide that because we realize that that's part of us. We need to deal with it so that when we get to our goal, we can feel more fulfilled. This is good stuff. With what you were saying about everything you went through, two things I wanted to unpack again. When you were going to your therapist, you did it for about 4 months, right? And then you stopped because of the patience thing, right? Oh, it's not happening fast enough. But I imagine the things that you learned at least were helpful, right?
Yes and no. I had been to a therapist a little over a decade ago, after my parents had split up. My dad had come out. It was just craziness. And my therapist just kind of sat back in his chair and was like, "Oh, all right, well, you're really handling this well." And I was just like, "That's not what you're supposed to tell me.
Hmm.
Like, you're supposed to fix the problem.
Hmm.
And if I'm handling this, then why am I here seeing you?" And that was kind of where I had gotten to with my more recent therapist after the loss of Ryan. She was like, "You seem really positive and you're looking on the bright side of things." And I'm like, "Then why am I here?" You're not solving anything. So I think at the end of the day, we can be our own best therapist. And not knocking therapy or anything like that. It definitely got me through a lot of different emotions and helped me screw my head back on straight. But it's like I said, I'm not a lifer.
Hmm.
And it was, I'm sure I will be back. I will be a repeat customer as the rest of my life continues. I'm young. I'm only 29. I know there's a lot more in store where this came from. So I'm definitely an advocate for uh, therapy, and there are so many benefits. But I think therapy kind of opened the door for me to start dealing with things myself. And once I realized that someone wasn't going to just come in and fix my problems, I was like, all right, I guess this is where the inside out thing kind of happens.
Mm.
So it definitely opened the door and opened my eyes and introduced me to, along with, support and guidance from really influential people in my life. It definitely got some doors open for me to start dealing with things for myself.
Good. Now you wrapped that up very nicely. Where yeah, some people do need to hear that therapy doesn't have to be an every week or all the time kind of thing. I even spoke to a friend and they're like, "Oh, I just can't afford it. I don't have the time to go that often." I'm like, "Well, I didn't go every week, and
Hmm.
I didn't go forever either." And they're like, "Oh, really? Maybe I'll give it a shot." So
Yeah,
what
and
you were, go ahead.
I think once people realize that, like, it's different for everybody. There are some people who need to go 2 or 3 times a week because they just need more guidance, and that's okay. But then there's also people who just go, I used to call it a tune up.
Hmm.
You take your car for a tune up, you take yourself for a tune up, you go once a month or once every 2 weeks, and it's just for that guidance, for that check-in. And one of the things that I realized for myself about therapy was, once I heard myself say some of the things that I wanted someone else to tell me, I was like, I already know this. Now I just have to deal with it. It's not
Hmm.
something that you can fix for me. It's, I have to fix it myself.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to, isn't it?
Mm.
When we talk to a therapist, like you're saying, they're not going to give us some magical word or magical formula that's going to solve everything. It really, part of the most effective part of it is that we're in a safe environment where we finally open up and allow ourselves to talk about and feel the emotions that are already inside of us. And at the same time, since our brain is designed, well, our brain and body are designed to heal, we now give them space to do so. And then, like you say, if you want to stick with a therapist, you need more time, great. If not, now you've opened the doors to connect with others that you need to, or to put your energy into something productive to help others. So we're going to talk about that too here in a second. So we'll talk about your what I call a passion project. But before we do, I just wanted to go over two mindsets or perspectives real quick. So
Okay.
you had your experience with things that you needed to recover from, and you had turned to eating. So for the sake of this conversation, we're going to call that an addiction, okay?
Hmm.
And then your late fiance, he had an addiction as well. So you have seen both sides, right?
Yeah.
Being in the situation and being very close to and trying to support somebody in that situation, correct?
Hmm.
So I wanted to hear from you, for the benefit of the listeners, what's something you learned there? I mean, some people look at somebody in an addiction and call them an addict. Therefore, they're a label, and now they're a thing instead of a person, right? Certainly doesn't help,
Not
but
at all.
you can't condone the behavior either. So what's the balance?
The balance, I think, is boundaries. I think in a relationship, you rely on that person and they rely on you. And when you're in something that you know nothing about, because I knew nothing about drug addiction, um, you know, you turn to people who you think could help, and a lot of the time they do, and that was very true for me. I turned to a few people who gave some really great advice because of what they had been through, and it was setting boundaries for them, not for yourself. So I think that's where the balance comes in. You know, toxic behavior is double-sided. You know, when you're with someone in an addiction of any kind, or you are in addiction yourself of any kind, there's boundaries for the outside world, and then there's boundaries for yourself. And I was starting to set boundaries that I wasn't going to tolerate these things from the person that I was with, but I did not set a boundary for myself as to what I was going to do in response to that, if that makes sense. So I think toxic behavior is double-sided, and anyone can display it, but at the same time, anyone can also set that boundary to not tolerate or to recognize when a toxic behavior is happening. And I think that's where I was missing puzzle pieces, you know, in that last situation. And, you know, for myself, you know, it was being aware. I know if and I mean, old habits pop up all the time, you know, where it's like, I had a horrible day, I just want ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's as simple as that. And then you're like, oh, am I eating this because I want it, or am I eating this to cope?
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of take a step back from it. And I think addiction to anything, obviously, you know, drugs and alcohol and certain drugs specifically really change the chemical balance. So it's much, much harder to recognize that. But I think, you know, if we are addicted to something like food or something along those lines, it's a little bit different. I won't say easier because you know, everybody's different, but it's different to take a step back once you recognize what you're doing and say, am I doing this because I want it, or am I doing this because I feel like I have to? And then when you step back from it and you're like, no, I was definitely doing that because I felt like I had to, or I was looking for comfort. You know, my current partner and I talk things to death, and we just laugh about it. You know, we would rather talk it out and get to the root of the issue than find toxic behavior to replace it and to not deal with it. And we're very fortunate in that regard that we're both on the same page with that, because it is just so important. Or, you know, I've turned to journaling a lot. I've turned to reading a lot, you know, and even patience with books. I hated waiting to get to the end of the book. I'm like, I could just watch the movie. And like, so my patience has just really grown a lot stronger with all of this, and just the self-awareness. And like I said, just advocating for myself. You know, I know the toxic behavior and I know it's not healthy. So I have to start advocating for myself if I want to see the change that I want to have. And that goes for drugs, that goes for food, that goes for alcohol, that goes for shopping. It literally goes for anything. You know, every time you do that action, stop for a second and say, why am I doing this?
There you go.
And then you answer your own question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that proves that we have control of our actions. A lot of times there's a connotation that people have with the word addict, or the idea of an addiction. Oh, that's a bad person. We can't talk about them. We have to stray away from them, and they don't have control. Well, in reality, how I see it is you have turned to that behavior in an attempt to hide or resolve the emotions that you have. Then after a while, your brain learns that that is a quote unquote solution for that pain. And that's why your brain turns back to it. In your example of ice cream, it's like, well, I had a hard day and all of a sudden I think of ice cream. Now we could beat ourselves up and say, no, I've been working for months to get away from ice cream. I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. Why do I have that temptation again? And then we beat ourselves up and we eat the ice cream, and then we're back into the addiction. But like you're saying, if we can step back and realize just the logical side of it and why our brain turns to that, then we can have control over it and make a conscious decision and say, look, ice cream isn't bad. I'm not saying ice cream is bad, but let me see why I'm doing it. If I'm doing it to cope with an emotion, let me cope with it in the proper way.
And that takes persistence, and it takes support. And a lot of people, in my experience, fail from lack of support or fail from lack of education. And, you know, it's hard. I watched it, you know, I know it's hard, but when you're brain is just wired differently. You have to have more support and more education. And I think once the stigma around addiction is changed, and we start seeing people, like you had said, seeing people as people, people who need help, people who need support, people who need education, and instead of seeing them as a label, then people will be able to get the help that they truly need. And that above all things is why I started, like you're saying, my passion project, to just help people become advocates for themselves, because they are so worthy of so much more than where they are in that low place.
Exactly. Good job for wrapping that up so well. Now, to wrap up what we're talking about, I want to talk about the healthy outlets, because somebody listening, hopefully they've understood so far that we see people as people, not see them as their behavior. But then they might think, okay, well, I have emotions, and if I learned how to define them and experience them, then what? I mean, if I turn to any behavior, is that bad? No. Like you're saying, if we put our energies, our emotional energy, if we deal with it properly and we're first honest with ourselves, then we can say, okay, what can I do that I'm passionate about that also helps somebody? And that is a healthy way of getting my energy out. So tell us about how you do it and what you've learned through that.
Absolutely. Some healthier outlets that I've turned to really are reading and writing. I have a journal, I have a vent journal, and then I have a, positive, this is what I want to accomplish, because I feel like when you put the two in the same place, they could get mixed up in the universe, and then you don't get what you ask for. So, I think it's great to have a place just to vent. I think painting is a great outlet. Musicians, or just listening to really passionate music is a great outlet. Anything that's got a positive outcome. A friend of ours had said to me once, he needs to be helping other people, because when he sees what he's doing for other people, he's automatically going to become that role model, and he's going to end up subconsciously making the change. And one day he's going to wake up and be like, wow, today isn't so bad, because you're, volunteering, or you're in a soup kitchen, or you're, just reading books in a kid's school. Like simple things that we don't realize could be outlets are actually bigger outlets than we give them credit for.
Very good. Thank you for that. So to wrap this up, like I keep saying, is I hope people are hearing these messages, right? We all experience emotions, whether it's a big traumatic thing or a flippant remark or just something in life that really affects us, right? We first need to be honest with ourselves. That happens at any time in life. We could be really good and we've gotten through a tough situation today, and then in a couple years, we have something else happen. And if we don't repeat the exercise and heal and really address those emotions, then we'll turn back to what we did. So we just always have to remember, hey, the responsibility is ours. Like you're saying, nobody's going to fix it for us, but that doesn't mean we have to do it alone either. We can use the healthy outlets of the journals, the music, the exercise, whatever it happens to be that's healthy for you, and use others for help. And then you can live an awesome life, much happier. Well, very good, Samantha. Thank you for sharing all that. How can people connect with you on social media if they'd like to do so?
Absolutely. So social media is a little wonky for me. My Facebook refuses to let me change my name back because they are asking for an ID confirmation that it's me, but my passport photo and my driver's license are terrible pictures, so they tell me it's not me. So on Facebook, my last name is spelled backwards. It's Samantha Tirone. But on Instagram, it's very easy. It's just Samantha_Tirone 26 for my birthday. And all the different projects that I have going on, the podcast that's coming up, the dance competition, and my passion project, all of those things are kind of filtered through my personal Instagram as well. So if there's something that piques your interest, you can definitely reach out and, follow the link and connect with either business or the podcast or the dance competition.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for joining. And everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of the Champions of Self podcast. And we will see you next time.